In 1976, a Formula One car rolled onto the grid at Anderstorp, Sweden, with 6 wheels. Not as a publicity stunt, not as a joke, as a genuine Grand Prix contender, and it won. The Tyrrell P34 remains the only 6-wheeled car ever to win a Formula One race, and the story behind it is stranger than the car itself. These are 10 facts about the Tyrrell P34, the 6-wheeled Formula One car that actually worked. Number 10. The designer was a transmission specialist who had never built a complete racing car before joining Tyrrell. Derek Gardner's background was in advanced transmission systems, not chassis design. Born in Leamington Spa in 1931, he showed an early passion for aviation and studied aerodynamics at Coventry Technical College before shifting to mechanical engineering. He worked at Ferguson Research on 4-wheel drive systems, including the drivetrain for the Matra MS-84 Formula One car in 1969. That was how he crossed paths with Ken Tyrrell, who at the time was running Matra chassis for his team. The two men met in a pub in Henley-on-Thames, roughly halfway between Tyrrell's base in Surrey and Gardner's home in Leamington Spa. Tyrrell needed someone to design his first in-house chassis, and Gardner, despite having never designed a complete Grand Prix car, got the job. He set up a design office in a spare bedroom at his house. The first car he produced, the Tyrrell 001, took pole position on its debut at the 1970 Canadian Grand Prix, with Jackie Stewart behind the wheel. His modified Tyrrell 003 then carried Stewart to the World Championship in 1971. His later designs, including the Tyrrell 006, delivered Stewart's 3rd title in 1973. 2 world titles from a man who designed racing cars in his spare bedroom. Gardner was the real deal. He just did not look like a typical Formula One designer. Number 9. The 6-wheel concept was born from a problem every other team was ignoring. By the mid-1970s, Formula One had a regulation that limited the front wing width to 1.5 meters. The problem was that the front tyres sat outside this width, fully exposed to the airflow. Exposed tyres generate lift and aerodynamic drag, which is exactly what you do not want on a car trying to go as fast as possible. Every other team dealt with this by adding more front wing angle to counteract the lift, which increased drag even further. Gardner took a completely different approach. Instead of fighting the tyres, he shrank them. 4 smaller 10-inch wheels could tuck behind the front wing entirely, hiding them from the airflow. The result, according to Gardner's calculations, was a reduction in frontal area and lift that produced a performance gain equivalent to roughly 40 extra horsepower. The concept also doubled the front tyre contact patch, giving more grip, and added 2 more front brake discs, improving braking power. Number 8. The car was developed in total secrecy and hidden under a tarpaulin with wire hoops. When Gardner first showed Ken Tyrrell his preliminary drawings in early 1975, Tyrrell thought it was a prank. It took a lengthy discussion about suspension geometry before Tyrrell was convinced the idea was serious. From that point, the project was classified. The team dispensed with their usual chassis numbering system and gave the car a code name, Project 34. Even the drivers, Jody, Scheckter and Patrick Depailler, were kept in the dark. Goodyear, which had to manufacture the custom tyres, was brought in early and sworn to secrecy. When the prototype was finally unveiled at the Heathrow Hotel near London on September 22, 1975, wire hoops were placed under the tarpaulin to give the car the silhouette of a conventional 4-wheeled machine. When the cover came off, the room went silent. Some in the audience were convinced it was a publicity stunt. Dennis Jenkinson, one of the most respected motorsport journalists of the era, was among the first to see it and could barely believe it was real. Number 7. Jackie Stewart reportedly choked on his drink when Gardner told him about it. According to Gardner himself, the retired 3-time world champion was on a flight home from the 1975 South African Grand Prix when Gardner snuck into the first-class cabin and told Stewart what Tyrrell was building. Stewart's reaction, in Gardner's words, was a fit of choking. Stewart had driven Gardner's earlier designs to 2 world championships and trusted the man's engineering judgment completely. The 6-wheel idea still caught him off guard. What made Stewart's reaction telling is that he understood Tyrrell's problem better than anyone. By the mid-1970s, almost every car on the grid used the same Ford Cosworth DFV engine and the same Hewland gearbox. The cars were becoming nearly identical. Finding a competitive edge meant thinking in ways nobody else was willing to try. Gardner was not interested in making a slightly better version of the same car as everyone else. He wanted to rethink the entire platform from the ground up. Number 6. The rules never actually said a Formula One car had to have 4 wheels. This detail made the entire project possible. Gardner noticed that the Formula One technical regulations simply assumed cars would have 4 wheels. The word 4 never appeared as a restriction. There was nothing in the rulebook that explicitly prohibited additional wheels. It was a loophole so obvious that nobody had ever thought to exploit it. Gardner did. And because the regulations also did not specify a minimum wheel diameter, the tiny 10-inch front wheels were perfectly legal. The FIA did not close this gap until years later, eventually stipulating that Formula One cars must have exactly 4 wheels. Number 5. Goodyear had to create an entirely new category of racing tyre that had never existed before. No Formula One tyre manufacturer had ever produced a 10-inch diameter racing tyre. Goodyear agreed to do it partly because they saw the publicity value and partly because they trusted Tyrrell's engineering pedigree. The initial tyres worked well enough for testing and early races. The problem was development. Goodyear's tyre testing equipment for the custom 10-inch rubber was limited to a single plant in Belgium, and access was restricted to certain nights of the week. As the 1976 season progressed, Goodyear poured the majority of their research and development budget into the standard-sized tyres used by every other team on the grid. By the end of that first season, the P34's front tyres were nearly 6 months behind the competition in development terms. The rear tyres, which were standard Formula One size, kept getting faster. The fronts stayed where they were. That imbalance would eventually destroy the project. Number 4. The designers cut portholes into the side of the cockpit so drivers could see their own front wheels. With 4 small wheels tucked behind the nose, the drivers had no way to judge where their front tyres were in relation to the apex of a corner. In a normal Formula One car, the driver uses the top of the front tyres as a visual reference point. The P34 removed that reference entirely. Gardner's solution was to cut small portholes into the cockpit sides just ahead of the driver, giving Scheckter and Depailler a line of sight to the outer front wheels. It was an elegant fix for a problem that only existed because the car itself was so unusual. The portholes also served a secondary purpose. Because the small tyres wore rapidly, drivers could monitor front tyre condition during the race without waiting for pit signals. The team also experimented with variable steering geometry, where the leading and trailing pair of front wheels could turn at different angles. This would have been useful on tight circuits like Monaco, but the system proved too complicated and was abandoned in favour of a simpler bell crank linkage that turned all 4 front wheels together. Number 3. The P34 won a Grand Prix on only its 4th ever race, and it finished 1st and 2nd. The car made its competitive debut at the 1976 Spanish Grand Prix at Jarama, with Depailler driving a single chassis, while Scheckter continued in the older Tyrrell 007. Depailler qualified 3rd on the grid, 11 places ahead of his teammate, proving immediately that the 6-wheeler was fast. He retired with brake problems in that race, but the potential was obvious. Both drivers had P34 chassis for Monaco 2 weeks later, and they finished 2nd and 3rd behind Niki Lauda's Ferrari. Then came Anderstorp, Sweden. The Scandinavian raceway was built on a flat airfield completely devoid of elevation changes, with a long back straight that doubled as the flying club's actual runway. The smooth, flowing layout with its constant radius banked corners was perfectly suited to the P34's aerodynamic advantages and its sensitive front-end grip. Scheckter put the 6-wheeler on pole position, nearly 0.4 of a second faster than Mario Andretti's Lotus in 2nd. In the race, Andretti jumped the start and was given a 60-second time penalty. He pushed hard to build a gap large enough to absorb the penalty, but his engine failed on lap 46, handing the lead to the two Tyrrells. Scheckter crossed the line first, Depailler second, with championship leader Niki Lauda a distant third. Tyrrell had a 1-2 finish in the same season that Lauda and James Hunt were fighting their legendary title battle. It remains, to this day, the only time a six-wheeled car has ever won a Grand Prix. The data on this channel shows that over 80% of you watching right now are not subscribed. That means you are showing up for the content, but the algorithm has no reason to show you the next video. If you have made it this far, you clearly care about the forgotten machines that shaped motorsport. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Number 2. The driver who won that race called the car a piece of junk and left the team. Jody Scheckter never hid how he felt about the P34. Despite 1 win, 1 pole position, 5 podium finishes, and a 3rd place in the 1976 World Drivers' Championship, the South African was blunt in public. His specific complaints centered on the brakes. With 4 front wheels and 6 half shafts, brake balance was no longer a simple matter of front-to-rear distribution. It became front-to-front-to-rear, and the interaction between the leading and trailing pair of small wheels made the car's handling inconsistent, especially on bumpy circuits. At smooth tracks like Anderstorp, Watkins Glen, and the Oostenrijkring, the P34 was competitive. On rough surfaces like Brands Hatch, Jarama, and the Nürburgring, the 4 front wheels would make and lose contact with the road surface unpredictably, creating grip levels that changed from one moment to the next. Patrick Depailler, by contrast, praised the car constantly. He loved the sharp front-end turn-in and the rear-biased oversteer characteristic that suited his driving style. 2 drivers in the same car had completely opposite opinions about it. Scheckter left Tyrrell at the end of 1976 to join Walter Wolf Racing. He was replaced by Ronnie Peterson for the following season. The 1977 P34B was redesigned with cleaner aerodynamics and a wider front track to improve the understeer problem, but the changes exposed the small front wheels to the airflow again, defeating the entire purpose of the design. Peterson's height also required chassis modifications that added weight. Tyrrell finished 6th in the Constructors' Championship that year with 19 retirements across the season. Gardner, heartbroken over the project's decline, walked away from Formula One mid-season without warning. He went to work as the Divisional Director of Engineering at Borg Warner and never returned to the sport. Number 1. The P34 inspired 3 rival 6-wheeled cars, and every single one of them was banned before it ever raced. The P34's success in 1976 did not go unnoticed. March Engineering, Williams and Ferrari all built experimental 6-wheeled prototypes. The difference was that all 3 put 4 wheels at the rear instead of the front, using smaller rear tyres to reduce drag from the opposite end of the car. March built the 240 with tandem rear axles. Williams developed the FW07D and later the FW08B using the same concept. Ferrari produced the 312 T6 with 4 rear wheels on a single shared axle, similar to how Auto Union had increased traction with its Type D Grand Prix cars in the 1930s. All 3 designs were tested extensively. None of them ever started a race. In 1983, the FIA banned cars with 4 driven wheels from competing. Later, the regulations were tightened further to explicitly state that a Formula One car must have a maximum of 4 wheels. The door Gardner had walked through was sealed shut permanently. No 6-wheeled car will ever race in Formula One again. And in a strange way, the rival prototypes validated everything Gardner had tried to do. If the idea was truly worthless, 3 of the best engineering departments in the sport would not have spent years chasing the same concept. The P34 existed for just 2 competitive seasons. In that time, it won 1 race, scored 8 second-place finishes across 1976 and 1977, and became arguably the most recognizable Formula One car ever built. Tyrrell built 7 original P34 chassis in total. 2 were destroyed and the 5 survivors ended up in museums and private collections across Britain, Germany and Japan. One of those original chassis sits in the lobby of Tamiya's headquarters in Shizuoka, a tribute from the model kit manufacturer that has produced at least 4 different versions of the P34 in scales from 1/12 to 1/10, radio-controlled. In 2020, a British engineering firm called CGA built 2 precise continuation copies using original blueprints and the Tyrrell family's blessing. Boeing was the only company that could supply aluminum sheets large enough to form the monocoque. One of those continuation cars was listed for sale at £1.75 million. For a car that raced for 2 years and won exactly once, that price tells you everything about what the P34 means to the sport. It appeared in the film Rush in 2013, set during the 1976 season that the real car competed in. It was even turned into a transformer, the Decepticon named Dragstrip in the original 1980s cartoon. And George Harrison, the former Beatle, referenced it in his 1976 song It's What You Value with the lyric, "Someone's driving a six-wheeler." A Formula One car that lasted 2 seasons, won once, and has been embedded in pop culture for half a century. If this changed how you look at the history of Formula One, subscribe. More like this is already in the pipeline.